10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 127. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Thank you all out there for tuning in each and every week. It's so wonderful to be able to put out this show for you and know that you're getting something out of it. Just a quick reminder, if you want all the PDFs to every single episode that we've ever put out, please head over to our Patreon page and you can find a link to that on 10minutejazzlesson.com, and there click on one of the Patreon banners and that'll bring you over where you can support us for only $3 a month. You get all 127 PDFs that we have ever put out on this show. And before we get into it, just another word on what your Patreon support means. I've been thinking this week about how much we expect our digital media to be free these days. And I'm all for it, to be honest with you. That's why I put out this podcast for free, so that anybody, anywhere, regardless of their financial situation, can gain something out of this show and hopefully become a better musician each and every week. But I really got to thinking about this, and you know what? I started pledging money to all of my favorite podcasts and all of my favorite digital media outlets. And through Patreon, this is easier than ever. You can donate whatever you want. You can choose to support the show on whatever level you'd like. And I really had to catch myself because I realized that I was consuming a lot of this digital media for free when I'm on this podcast asking you guys for money to support this podcast. But I really truly believe in supporting creators because I think sometimes we forget that these are actual real people with real expenses that are putting out all of this wonderful content for us. So if you're one of those people that wants to start supporting your creators and you choose to do it on this show, well, we thank you very, very much. And again, you can go over to our website, click on the Patreon banner, and become a member for $3 a month. So I wanted to give a shout out to some of our patrons. I wanted to give a shout out to Jenny, Carl, and Neil. And Neil actually chose to become a $5 patron. So thank you, Neil. He's really going above and beyond to support the show. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So last week we talked about this cadence called the backdoor cadence, and I explained what it meant. If you haven't checked out last week's episode, it is going to be required listening before you get into this week's material. And let's just do a quick review. So a backdoor 2-5-1 instead of 2-5-1, what we're really doing is we're doing a 4 to a flat 7 to a 1. So it's a little bit of a different way of getting to the one chord, but it sounds amazing and it's a little bit unexpected, and that's why we love it so much. And that's why we have to learn how to play over it because it's not your typical everyday 2-5-1 progression like we talk about on the show so often. So last week we went over the theory behind it and we gave you a couple of examples from different tunes on where this progression actually occurs. Now what we're going to do this week is we're going to dive a little bit deeper on actually playing over this progression and some of the thoughts that you should be thinking about when you are approaching this particular set of voice leading, right? So what we're going to examine is the flat 7 chord, what would normally be the 5 chord, into our new 1 chord, right? And how those two chords relate. And this is what I always do when I'm trying to figure out how to get from one chord to another. I'll actually just line up the chord tones like I've done on your PDF. Right at the very, very top, I've lined up the chord tones. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to discover if there are any common tones or I'm looking for half-step relationships. Because we all know that the principles of voice leading tell us that we should either be using common tones or the closest possible note when we're resolving or going from one chord to another to provide the smoothest effect in our lines and solos and compositions and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I've started by doing. If you look at your PDF, what I've done is I've lined the two chords up next to each other, G7 and A major 7, which of course is the resolution to one of these backdoor cadences. So if you look at this, there's actually no common tones. We don't have any common tones between the two chords if we're just using 1, 3, 5, and 7, right? So now my next step is going to be to look for half steps. Now, luckily, there are a lot of half steps. Let me play the sound of a basic G7 chord going into an A major 7 for you so you can hear how the two chords relate, and then we'll talk about those half steps that are present between them. So here's G7 going to A major 7. So you can hear that relationship is a really interesting one. We went over this last week, but I just wanted to get it back in your ears so that you know what we're talking about. All right, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to look at those half-step relationships. So if you think about a G7 chord, we've got G, B, D, and F. Those are 1, 3, 5, and 7. And then if you think about an A major 7 chord, we have A, C sharp, E, and G sharp. So let's investigate some of those. So our half-step relationships are kind of nice here. There are 3 of them. And I've put the half-step relationships on the A major 7 chord in red so you can see them very, very clearly. So we've got a half-step relationship between D in the G7 chord down to C sharp in the A major 7 chord. And then we also have a half-step relationship. We have an F in the G7 chord that goes to an E in the A major 7 chord. And then we also have a G in the G7 chord going to a G sharp in the A major 7 chord. And if what I just said is confusing you, you need to look at that PDF so that you get the visual as well as me telling you what they are. The visual will come in really, really handy here. So now what your action step is to actually start getting some of this into your playing is to write some of your own vocabulary using these resolution points. So on the PDF, you'll notice there's 3 backdoor cadence lines that resolve to those different points that I just mentioned. All right, so the stuff that you play over the 2 and the 5, which again aren't really 2 and 5, but I'm just going to say that as a shorthand to make this a little bit easier to explain. So the lines that you can play over them are just your typical regular 2-5-1 lines, but of course they don't go to the 1. That's the surprising part. So you can play all the material that you know. The only thing you have to be really careful of at the end of the measure is that you are resolving to one of these notes that I just mentioned. So let me play the first 2-5-1 line, backdoor 2-5-1 line that I've written. And this one's going to resolve from the F over G7 into the E over A major 7. Pay particular attention to how surprising it sounds when I start playing over that A major 7 chord and how different that resolution sounds from your typical 2-5-1. So here is the 7th of the flat 7 chord going into the 5th of our 1 chord. So you can hear it's like our typical 2-5-1. We're expecting it to go to that 1 chord, and then boom, all of a sudden we realize that it is a backdoor cadence. Nothing really different about the line that I've written over the 2 chord and the 5 chord. It's really when it hits that other chord that you realize, okay, this is not your typical progression here. So the second one, I'm going to use the half-step relationship between the 5 on the G7, so D, and the third on our A major 7 chord. So you're going to hear the resolution go from D to a C sharp. And again, it should strike you just like the last one did. Here's example number 2 on your PDF. So same thing when the resolution comes around, you hear that it is not your typical sound that your ears are used to. Now finally, what we're going to do on the third example is we're going to use the G over the G7, the 1, and we're going to resolve that to the major 7 over the A major 7 chord. So you'll notice that the and of 4 in measure 2 resolves to a G sharp on the 1 of measure 3. And this is, in my opinion, one of the coolest sounds about using these backdoor cadences, this 1 to major 7 sound, because this is really not present in a traditional 2-5-1. So it provides us with some new note relationships that are really striking and can give your playing a very, very different sound. So here's example number 3. That one's kind of my favorite sound, as I mentioned before, because it's just so striking. And I love playing over that major chord after the backdoor progression because it just sounds so fresh and bright, which a regular 2-5-1 sounds wonderful too, but this is just such a great option when you want to kind of switch it up. So think about, some of the tunes that you can actually use this over. Think about actually using this in some of your own compositions. This is a great compositional device. When you're sick of just doing regular cadences, try incorporating this and see what happens. In fact, you could even write a tune that's based around the backdoor cadence, and I think that would be a fantastic exercise for you. Even if you never kept the tune and played it in public, it's good to just experiment with this kind of stuff. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions about any of the material in it, make sure you shoot me an email, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Again, think about donating to the show and joining all of these outrageously generous folks over there that are pledging their support each month, and you'll get all the PDFs in return. We've also got some other stuff up our sleeve, including we're going to give you a massive discount on our new ebook, The Chromatic Way, which is going to be coming out very, very soon. Might even be out by the time this episode is being listened to by your ears. So check it out. Consider becoming a patron today, and we will talk to you next week with some brand new episodes. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.